turn that off probably. Don't want any of that in there. So I think we are now live on YouTube, and we'll wait for some people to get in. Hello, guys. Good, just about afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. Hope everyone that is watching right now is doing well. We're very, very excited to bring to you our workplace wellbeing webinar. And we have some fantastic people on board today to offer some real value on this subject. First of all, we've got Claire Grant from Solent Mind. Solent Mind are a fantastic corporate partner of ours. They've done a lot of work with us. We've done a lot of work with them over the past year as well. Really, really important organisation within the community. I will let Claire explain in a moment. We also have Claire from YuLife. So we've got two Claires today. We've got Claire squared, so it's all going to be good. And yeah, thank you so much both for joining. A couple of things that I do need to cover off before we start and dive into the live event. Just a couple of housekeeping notes just to go over. So there is a 10-second delay between us and YouTube, so do not worry about that. A recording of this webinar will be sent to every single person that signed up through the link and the Eventbrite page. We will be having polls throughout as well. The live events, there'll be live polls so we can see the results from that as well, maybe have a discussion around that. And also there will be a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the live stream to allow our guests and guest speakers to answer any questions that might come in from the live audience. Claire Grant from Solent Mind, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself a little bit, tell us all a little bit about what Solent Mind do, and maybe a little bit about your motivation for joining us today on the live event.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Aidan, and thanks for inviting us along. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my name's Claire. I'm Assistant Director of Services at Solent Mind. So Solent Mind are a charity that covers most of the Hampshire area, including Southampton and Portsmouth. We're affiliated to National Mind through a federation agreement, but we are a registered charity of our own accord. So we have our own self-trustees, our own charity commission registration and everything else. And so we're responsible for our own fundraising and things like that. And we deliver a whole range of mental health services across the area. We have a range of wellbeing centres across the Hampshire area. We have our Positive Mind Centre down in Portsmouth. In Southampton, we have our Mayfield Nurseries, where I am at the moment, where we do a lot of horticulture and nature-based work to improve wellbeing. And we've got lots and lots of community services as well, where people can join groups or get one-to-one support to overcome any mental health barriers they may be facing. And we work with people of all ages and all kind of mental health situations. So people that perhaps are feeling a little bit unwell, perhaps a little bit anxious or something else, but haven't got a formal diagnosis, right up to those at the more sort of severe and long-term end of the spectrum, and pretty much everything in between. And as you said, we are very, very pleased and grateful to have a corporate partnership with Roma Black this year. And our kind of motivation for being here today is around the fact that, we know how prevalent mental health is. We know that COVID had a big impact. We suspect that the cost of living crisis will also have a big impact. And work, for most of us, is where we spend most of our time. So actually really, really important that those conversations and those thoughts about personal wellbeing and how we're feeling aren't just for kind of behind closed doors at home. One of our big missions is to kind of encourage people to talk about it and encourage the world to be a bit more mental health friendly and a bit more understanding of mental health. So fantastic if we can do a little bit of that today. Thank you, Aidan.
No worries, absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Claire. And coming over to Claire Cathcart from YuLife, had a fantastic conversation with you yesterday, and the one thing that I took away was how passionate you are about this. Doing my research on YuLife and speaking to you yesterday, tell us a little bit about it. It sounds like at the core of YuLife is wellbeing, is that exact topic, So tell us a little bit about what you do, Claire, and tell us a little bit about YuLife as a whole, and a little bit about your motivation for why you were keen to jump on board with us today.
Yeah, sure. Always too many Claires in the room. I found that all through my career, lots of Claires. So I've been at YuLife for 6 months, so not a huge amount of time. I'm leading the people team, and it's really clear that wellbeing is literally at the core of the business. So very briefly, we provide insurance products to, so we work with businesses, they can provide it to their employees. So life insurance, income protection, dental insurance. But there's lots of people providing insurance. So our mission is to disrupt the insurance industry a little bit. And we have this really amazing wellbeing app that kind of sits alongside it. So most people don't benefit from insurance products. They're there, they give you peace of mind, but on a day-to-day basis, you're not getting a huge amount of benefit from it. So our wellbeing app really encourages habits, to form habits for your well-being. So there's quests on there, walking quests, you can do fitness classes. We partner with Meditopia and Calm, so you can do meditation every day, and then you earn UCoin. You can save it up or keep spending it, and we work with a lot of different partners. So if you want to spend your UCoin on providing food for families in Ukraine, for example, you can do that. We've got some lovely ESG partners providing clean water for families in Africa, and then kind of Amazon and John Lewis and all the other good stuff that you can spend your UCoin on. So well-being is literally at the heart of everything we do. From a kind of personal perspective, I've been in HR for about 15 years, and I've seen a lot of cases. You know, when you get that call that says, oh, this person's off sick with stress and anxiety, it happens so much. And I guess my motivation is that we never want people to get to the point where they feel like they can't cope. So I do think you probably see this in your world, Claire, that it's still very much a taboo topic. You know, particularly males don't particularly come forward and kind of tell people what's on their mind. So any way that we can raise awareness and kind of break that taboo a little bit, I think it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can tell from that introduction from both Claires, we're in fantastic hands today. A little bit about me, I suppose. Again, not a professional on this. I just have a passion for spreading awareness and being a male, I suppose, to speak transparently about my mental health. Been on a journey myself, and really keen to continue that. And the best way that I've felt that I've been able to deal with my mental health is just to speak about it as much as possible, whether it be on live events, whether it be on podcasts, whether it be to everyone in the office. That's really helped me, and hopefully, if we can help one person today, that's a win in my book. So we're going to be covering a couple of topics today. First topic that I'd like to kind of dive into and discuss is why, as a whole, do we feel that workplace wellbeing is important? And maybe a couple of questions off the back of that. So again, I'll kind of keep the order, I suppose. I'll come to Claire Grant first at Solent Mind. Why do you and Solent Mind feel that workplace wellbeing is important? And just a little bit about that, really, Claire.
Absolutely. Well, I think well-being everywhere is important. And as I said earlier, for a lot of us, we spend the majority of our time at work. Our colleagues are perhaps the people that we spend the most time with day to day. And so perhaps we are most likely to see in each other when we might start to struggle. And as Claire was saying, it's actually, we don't want people to get to the point where they can't cope. We want to be able to normalise the fact that people are able to share that earlier and get help and support earlier rather than get into that stage. But also, obviously, work is busy. We're all very busy, meetings and deadlines and reports and whatever else, whatever your role might be, the pressure is there, isn't it? And that in itself can have an impact. We are all human beings, although we come to do a job. There can be other stuff going on at home or out in the big wide world, especially at the moment. Lots of people worried about money and things like that. And actually, what we quite often find with people's well-being is it's not one single thing, it's lots of little things that chip away and chip away and chip away and wear people down. And actually what we want to do is create a culture where it's more normalised and more accepted, and actively encouraged, in fact, to be able to talk about those things and share those things and support one another so that we don't get to the point where everything's chipped away and then we become really quite unwell.
That makes total sense. And I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I think it's not just one thing that happens in someone's life that suddenly you feel like you're struggling, whether that be in or out of the workplace. Exactly what you said, it's not just in the workplace. I feel this is important. It's absolutely everywhere, especially for me. I suppose I can talk from personal experiences. It was a layer of a couple of things. And it's funny because the last kind of the smallest thing can kind of send you over the edge a little bit and make you actually sit back and realise what's going on. What are your thoughts on that question, Claire, from YuLife?
I think employers have a huge responsibility around this stuff. Huge. I actually presented earlier in the week, go back to Claire's point, over the course of your career, you're spending 90,000 hours at work. It's a scary thought. And I do think, that whether we like to admit it or not, the workplace does cause pressure for people. The targets we have, the KPIs, the deadlines, it is a huge pressure. So I think as an employer, we have huge responsibilities to make sure that that pressure isn't there, firstly, but also to look at kind of what we can do to support people. And I think, we do have the ability to access different, I'm sure we'll talk about kind of things that people can do to support their mental health, but there are things that we can provide access to for people that you may not be able to access kind of as an individual. So I think the more employers are talking about it, as I said in kind of the introduction, like removing that taboo, we can keep talking about it. We actually have we introduced vulnerability sessions at YuLife, where we encourage people to share their stories, like you're doing, Aidan. You've kind of talked about, you started to touch on your personal experiences. So I think we have huge responsibility, but actually we can influence people in a significant way. So yeah, lots for us to do, I think, as employers.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm very big on vulnerability in my own kind of personal story, and again, I think it's that feeling of vulnerability that actually makes me a little bit more at peace. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. I find the more vulnerable I am, and the more vulnerable positions that I put myself in, the more comfortable I kind of feel talking about my mental health. And I actually attend it's actually called Mindful Movement. It's a fantastic session that another lady called Claire puts on in Portsmouth. So there's loads of Claires doing fantastic work within the wellbeing space. But I'm actually the only male that attends these sessions at the moment, and there's about 25 other females that go there. And it definitely pushes me out of my comfort zone a little bit, and afterwards I just feel so great about it, because not only am I doing it for myself, but I'm actually promoting more males to go to it as well. And I think even just attending that session, it kind of almost generalizes the entire subject. Sometimes men are a little bit more scared to do these sorts of things. And I definitely feel like hopefully we're kind of moving that needle forward a little bit, and males can be a little bit more vulnerable with being vulnerable, being more comfortable in that environment. How do we all feel about kind of how do you feel like workplace well-being, if someone is suffering with or is struggling with their well-being in the workplace, how do we feel that can affect things like productivity, results, the general business targets as well? Is there anything that you guys have kind of seen to that effect? I know with Claire being in HR for 15 plus years, I can imagine you've probably seen a lot of different things, but is there anything that kind of jumps out to you around kind of the productivity side of things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if people are struggling with their mental health, that's one of the first signs that their performance dips. I think also people's moods, both ways, actually, positive, negative. People can influence others around them very, very easily. So if some people are suffering with low mood, for example, that will be felt by other people around them. So yeah, it will impact a lot of things. And going back to our responsibility, we have to be able to spot those signs and not just overlook them. I think be willing to have that conversation. And sometimes these conversations are difficult. They're really difficult to have, and some managers may shy away from it. When managers come to me and say, "Oh, I've got a performance issue with so and so," I always ask them, "Is there anything else going on in their personal life?" It's one of the first things I say, because we're not just going to go and tackle performance if they've got a whole heap of other things going on. So I think noticing a dip in performance, for example, is one of the key ways that we can really recognise that something's going on.
Yeah, and I think changes generally, kind of changes in patterns of behaviour. I think people can perhaps become a little bit withdrawn. So if you see, we know our colleagues, we tend to work with them a lot. So it's noticing changes in that. But certainly, I think one of the warning signs can be when people are just not as engaged as usual, which might be because they are struggling and actually they're worried that that's going to be spotted, so they're perhaps not joining meetings or not going to various sort of get-togethers and things like that. But it could also be because of the productivity thing. It could also be that because actually when we're feeling really unwell or really anxious or kind of having really low mood, it can be much more difficult to do things. Things do take longer, so you may find that some of the trimmings, if you like, disappear. So some of the Teams meetings doing some other stuff, lunches or whatever else it may be. And as I say, that might be because that person doesn't feel like socialising, but it could also be because they're struggling to maintain their output in terms of work, and so they're taking all the extra time they can to do that. So there's I think being mindful of any changes or changes in patterns of behaviour and stuff.
I feel like that conversation piece is so important, and it's quite a sensitive subject, I suppose, to go and talk to someone about, especially if, you know, performance is dipping slightly or they are feeling slightly withdrawn. It might be quite a hard conversation to have. I wouldn't know. I can only really speak from a colleague point of view. I suppose I've never been in a position of power to where I would have to go and ask someone, you know, about that, you know, if there's anything going on that might be affecting their performance. How would you, I suppose, kind of construct that conversation in a sensitive way that could facilitate a conversation about being a little bit more vulnerable and opening up about maybe their well-being and their struggling?
I think that I guess my first point is about creating that culture where those conversations are happening naturally anyway. So I always say to managers, I hope you're having regular one-to-ones in the first place, but don't just talk about work. Actually have, you know, on your bullet points of things that you want to talk about, well-being is always a bullet point. So every single one-to-one you have, you are talking to them about how they're doing. You know, I say this all the time, ask someone, how are you? Good, thanks, I'm great, how are you? Ask again, no, really, how are you? And they will open up. So if you are having that conversation on a regular basis and this is the norm, then it makes it much, much easier. So when you identify kind of performance issues, you can joke, say, now I ask you every week, how are you? Really, how are you? So it's much more comfortable to have the conversations. If you never talk about well-being, if you never talk about mental health, never talk about these things, and then randomly out of the blue, hey, anything going on? You know, it's a much more difficult conversation. So I think creating that culture, creating that safe space as part of just how we do things around here, it will put you in a far stronger position to have those conversations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, everyone that is listening to this and everyone out there that might not be as well have been in those companies where they've not necessarily felt comfortable to talk about that. And one thing that I got straight off the bat when I joined here at Roma Black about 7 months ago was that it's just such an open forum and everyone was so transparent about the way they were feeling. And I suppose that kind of promoted me to do it as well a little bit more. I'd kind of already opened up about my personal experiences and, you know, to my family and, you know, anyone that might be following me on LinkedIn, I don't know. But yeah, the first real step that I took was messaging a totally random Instagram account just because of coincidence. I saw it on someone's story and it just seemed like such a coincidence and such strange timing that I was feeling at my lowest and I saw this story on Instagram of a men's mental health page, and that's kind of the first step I took. So I think it's so important to have that line of communication open with your managers. Even when I came in, you know, a couple of the first conversations I had was around well-being, mental health, and that was one thing that I really said to our director. That was one of the directions that I wanted to go in with my personal desk, is just helping out as many mental health tech companies as possible to help them support as many people as possible. But yeah, I think with the conversation side of things, I think the more time you can get people talking about it in a more light-hearted way, like you say, Claire, that, you know, it just makes them feel a lot more comfortable when you come to them again. And if you can position it in a light-hearted way, have a little bit of a joke about it, I think it brings the barriers down a little bit. Did you have anything to add on that, Claire Grant, for Solent Mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be. I think it's very unusual that we're really struggling and that we don't know it. I mean, sometimes we don't realise it until a bit later on, and then we think, oh yeah, you know, actually things haven't been right for a while. But I think actually if you're at the point where it's affecting performance and you're needing to have that conversation, the person is probably aware. But as Claire was saying, there is still a taboo. And I think there is still particularly a taboo at work. There is still a fear. Even if you're very kind of open and understanding about mental health in your own life, I think there is still a fear about saying it at work, particularly about saying it about yourself at work, and that somehow will be put down as a weakness, or that people will question your ability to do your job, and it might affect your chances of progression and things like that. So I think it's very hard anyway, and with that added pressure on top, almost impossible to voluntarily go to somebody and say, oh, do you know, I'm struggling with my mental health today, particularly if your workplace doesn't have the culture of doing that. So I think in terms of managers and how we approach that conversation, I think it's really important that we're gentle and that we're open-minded, but also sometimes it can help to be slightly direct, to say, do you know what, I've noticed things aren't right with you, and I'm worried about you. Should we talk about that? What's going on with you? How can I help? Because actually people will normally answer that in a way that they perhaps wouldn't volunteer the information themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important not to shy away, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you brought up a really good point. I suppose the last thing on this sort of topic in general, if someone is at work and I suppose they don't necessarily feel like they've got that line of communication with their, with the business in general about their workplace well-being, maybe just a couple of tips to maybe start that conversation, or do you think that's actually on the employer to bring that forward? Where does that kind of conversation lie? Where does that balance lie, I suppose, if that makes sense?
I think from my perspective, it's one of the things around employee engagement, and I know this isn't about employee engagement, but one of the kind of key things is about anonymity. So people need to feel like they have a connection with their line manager. So all line managers should be asking, they should know their children's names and where they like to go on holiday and what their drivers are, what their motivations are. So I think any manager listening to this, if you're not doing that, you don't know your people, go and ask those questions. And it might be a little bit uncomfortable because it's not your normal style, but people don't want to feel anonymous. They want to feel heard. So I think if managers can create that connection, they will be the first person that they will go to in that company. So in the absence of a connection, this is where I guess services like Claire provides, the EAP that YuLife provide. It's just knowing as an employee, where do I go for help? What is the number for the EAP service? Or, has the company, do we partner with anyone else? Do they recommend any helplines? So I think all employees need to know where they can go. Managers should always be the first point of contact, in my opinion. But we should make it visible where the support's available.
Yeah, and also I think how people can ask is an important thing. Not everyone will want to ask in person or using their voice. Actually, it can very, very often be easier to write it down, to send an email or something like that, and then follow up that conversation. We produce a leaflet called Find the Words, which is aimed at being able to share with health professionals how you're feeling, but equally valid within the workplace setting, and tools like workplace wellbeing plans and things like that actually people can complete when they're not unwell. So we tend to complete them at Solent Mind as a matter of course for all of our roles, that say things like, if you're unwell, what do you want us to do? What might we notice? How do you want us to approach that with you? So that actually that's out there then, that's the thing that we all might have to face at some point, and how can we best do it? But I think, in terms of if you're the employee struggling, think about putting it down in an email or in a note or something like that if you really feel that you can't find the words. And as a manager, kind of be open and receptive to that, and make sure that you have got different avenues open, and just exactly as Claire says, that your one-to-one meeting isn't the only time or the only opportunity and avenue that people have got to tell you things.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think not, like you say, not just, because it's hard enough as it is to go and speak to someone about it face to face, but having that line of communication, whether it's via a text message, whether it's via WhatsApp, whether it's via an email, I think that's really important. And that's a really, really good point, Claire. Thank you for that. I know we've covered off in a little bit of detail, with the signs of an employee struggling with their mental well-being in the workplace, being slightly withdrawn, maybe the performance has dipped slightly, but let's talk about it in a little bit more of a broader sense, I suppose. What have you guys seen over the courses of your careers? Some of the main signs and maybe some of the not so noticeable signs that an employee is struggling with their mental well-being.
I think one of the things I see a lot is people are late. So people that haven't been late previously start to become late for work, and it's because they're struggling to sleep or get to sleep at night. then they're, you know, sleeping through their alarm and, you know, just struggling to get going in the morning. So whilst you might think, oh, they're just 10 minutes late, it's a nothing, it might actually be quite a significant sign that they're struggling. I think other things that are probably less noticeable but important, so withdrawing in meetings. So, you know, people don't always notice the quiet ones. So it's when they kind of withdraw in themselves, maybe a change in their attitude, change in behavior, and it's kind of small signs over time. So that's where I think managers need to know their people really well, need to be really switched on. So when these little things come through, don't just dismiss it like, oh, they're having a bad day. Like, really pay attention to them. Yeah, and obviously we talked about performance as well. That's really one of the biggest things that managers will see when people aren't performing, and that's the thing that they want to pick up. But you need to pay attention to all the other signs as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Claire there. I think it's really important that managers know their people enough to notice a change, because it looks very different for everybody in terms of when we start to struggle. But actually, that's where it comes down to you having not just managers, but colleagues, you know, as peers, we should look out for each other and take note of changes like that. As I said, we spend an awful lot of time with our colleagues, and some of the other signs might be sort of changes in appearance we do notice, which isn't necessarily always not looking as well groomed. It can be the opposite. I've certainly worked with clients and service users who actually, when they're well, they turn up in a tracksuit with their hair in a bun. When they're not well, they turn up dressed up to the nines with their makeup on, because that's the only way they can get themselves out of the house, is to have this real mask on. So I'd also say that stay away from stereotypes, types, and perhaps what you think depression or what you think anxiety looks like, because it can be very different. Anxiety, for example, you know, we support people a lot with panic attacks and things like that, and it can look like not wanting to go out, but it can also look like actually perhaps being a bit loud, perhaps coming across as a little bit arrogant, but actually it's the nerves, it's the coping mechanisms kind of going a bit into overdrive. So I don't think there is a description of what a particular mental health issue looks like, but actually the key, exactly as Claire said, is about knowing those people, because it probably doesn't look like them when they're well, and that's the key to it.
No, I think that's a really interesting point. You know, the people that feel the most comfortable might come in the most comfortable clothes, and it might be quite a logical kind of piecing together. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't ever really thought of it like that. From what I've heard from you guys on this subject, especially, it sounds like the most important thing in kind of seeing the signs is knowing your people as well as you possibly can. If we've got a couple of people on here at the moment that are in that position where they are managing people, or they have a team, or they're, you know, in a higher up position within the company, and they might struggle to know their people a little bit more, what advice would you maybe give them to approaching it again in a sensitive way, but also learning a little bit more about your people so you can spot these signs a little bit more quickly?
I think, like, don't be afraid to just say, like, check in with people. I mean, we work mainly remotely now, which makes it even harder, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not sitting next to that person every day. And I very often spend a lot of my week just randomly messaging people saying, hey, I'm just checking in. They don't work directly in my team, and I'm just like, hey, how are you? How are you doing? Haven't spoken to you in a while. So I think, you know, whether you're in an office or a remote first environment, I think just check in with people, just have that conversation and say, hey, I'm here. I see you. You know, you're important. What's going on? And I think also you can, I love the English language and the power of words, right? So when you ask a question, oh, how are you? And you go, yeah, I'm great, thanks. How are you? So finding, you know, different ways to ask the question is really important. So you can say, oh yeah, have you got any holidays booked in? You know, are you seeing your family at Christmas? And so if you ask different kinds of questions, you'll get different responses. So, you know, I think if you are a leader of the business, or maybe a new manager, you don't know your people so well, just have a conversation. You know, we're all humans at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what your job title is. Just make that connection with them and just say, you know, how's it going?
I definitely think it's about forming that consistency as well. You know, not just messaging them once or twice. You know, having that kind of weekly, you know, that weekly check-in, or keeping it consistent, just so they know that okay, even if they're going to be expecting a message from you, that's almost a good point. But yeah, anything you wanted to add on that, Claire? Grant?
Yeah, no, just to agree with Claire, it is about making those opportunities to check in, particularly thinking about people that there's a mixture of people who don't work in the same locations. Some people work hybridly. So it is about thinking culturally as an organisation, what mechanisms have you got in place for people to check in, and also to discuss and perhaps pick up some of those social connections that hybrid working doesn't allow us. So things I know at Solent Mind we use Workplace, the kind of the online tool Workplace, where it's quite informal. People share pictures of their pets, but they also share bits of, how this is what's going on in my life. This is my garden. I've just put my tree up, and one thing or another. And as Claire was saying about those questions, think about open questions. Think about things like, "Oh, morning. How did you sleep last night?" Things that can't be brushed off with an okay, but actually might give you a little bit of an insight into the bigger picture.
No, these are all really good points, and it's great that I'm really learning something myself here. My goal is to go into that kind of management position and have a team. That's kind of my passion. So it's really good to actually pick up these tips and tricks really early on, and so that's really good. Thanks so much for that. With regards to with the employer as in general, I suppose, how do you guys feel personally that employers can support their employees with their mental well-being? What kind of structures can we put in place? It could be very simple, it could be very, very kind of elaborate, but what have you seen worked in the workplace to support people that might be struggling?
I think you need to have there's not going to be one big initiative that is going to fix all of this stuff. It has to be consistent. There has to be a number of different channels, and it needs to be consistent. Just lots of things all the time. So we've already talked about one-to-one. So management training, making sure those one-to-ones are happening on a regular basis and they're having the right conversation. We train our managers to be mental health first aiders. So for anyone that doesn't have that in their organisation, it's not about all of your managers being counsellors. There's experts out there. It's about being able to spot the signs and being able to signpost. I think that's really important. And then other things that we have at YuLife, obviously the products that we sell to our customers, we give it to our employees as well. So making sure that people are aware of the EAP helpline. We also provide external coaching for people as well. It's free for our employees. We obviously pay for it through More Happy, so people can go and have coaching. So I think it's just lots of different avenues, lots of different channels, and just talking about it all the time. You're never just going to have one big, hey, let's talk about mental health week. It's not going to do anything. It needs to be a consistent thing.
Anything to add on that, Claire? Grant?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And we quite often do get invited into Mental Health Week in your workplace. And actually it gets people talking about it for a week, and then they come in on the following Monday morning and it's back to state normal. And it doesn't really make any change unless it's followed up by actions and commitment in terms of policy and management and those kinds of things. I think also it's about, in terms of senior management, it's about being in touch with the workplace, and particularly with the front line, if you're in a position that where there's kind of layers in between you and that, having a really good feel for what the kind of the temperature in terms of stress and pressure is like in the organisation, because in terms of making people feel valued, I think it's really, really important that we recognise where the pressure points are. And it might be that we can't change them. It might be that, for example, we do a lot of blue light emergency services, and we can't change the fact that those jobs are pressured. But equally, we need to be able to acknowledge it. We need to be able to recognise it, put in place what we can, and create opportunities for people to express that those things are pressured, and to not feel like that's something that they can't say, or that they'll be judged on it. And I think it's where I've seen kind of mental health initiatives perhaps go a bit wrong or backfire on managers. It's when they've said, to improve everybody's well-being, we're going to give everybody a chocolate brownie on a Wednesday. We're going to send it out, and actually, if you're there knee deep in 20 reports that are due by 5 o'clock and what have you, and you're not getting very good pay or whatever else it may be, actually that feels really insulting and really out of touch and does the opposite of what people plan for it to do. So I'd say really, really important, know your workforce, know what their pressure points are, know where the stresses and the difficulties may lie, and fix them and make them better if you can. But even if some of them you can't make better if they're nature of the job, but acknowledge them and value and openly recognise the impact that has on your staff, and value the commitment that they show by kind of sticking with it.
Yeah, certainly agree. On the topic of this in general, I suppose, and a couple of things have kind of cropped up to me about being important. The knowing your people. That's one thing that I'm really going to take away from this is the first step in all of this to make a solid kind of foundation for everyone to be able to speak is knowing your people as well as possible. And I can imagine in a company of 1,000 people, knowing everyone is quite hard, so again, and then it's the consistency as well. Any kind of points on potentially any kind of managers in here, like you said, Claire, new managers potentially, on kind of how to be more consistent with checking in, and again, to do it in a more sensitive way rather than kind of being quite brash and in your face with it. I think that consistency is so important. So one thing I'm going to certainly take away from this is how to implement those kind of consistent points and touch points with colleagues. I've not kind of got staff yet, I suppose, but yeah, with my colleagues as well. Any kind of tips on that, I suppose, for any new managers, any managers out there on how to kind of be more consistent with it?
I think all of this starts with leadership, right? So it all starts with creating the culture and those guys role modeling it. So if you're a manager, watch what the people above you are doing, and kind of emulate that, because that's the culture. The culture at YuLife is, if I were to say, oh, hey, I've got a doctor's appointment, the response wouldn't be, okay, but make the time back. It'll be, okay, I hope you're all right. So however you're doing by the leaders of the business, and watch them, because that's a really big deal, particularly if you're a new manager. And I think the scary thing about being a manager is if someone comes to you and says, I'm really suffering with anxiety or depression, and you just have that, oh my God, I've never dealt with this before moment. Don't panic. All you have to do is listen. In that moment, just listen. Say, I'm here for you. Talk to me. We will get you the support that you need. And that's it. You don't have to be an expert. You're not a trained counsellor. So kind of don't worry. Encourage the conversation, but don't think you have to know everything and have all of the answers. You won't. I've been in HR for 15 years. I don't have all the answers. It's just about listening, showing empathy, and signposting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being human, isn't it? Not being an expert. It's about being a human being and showing that compassion and understanding.
I also think as well is, absolutely, you don't want to pretend like you're an expert, or you don't want to pretend like you have all the tools, because from my experience and speaking to people that have struggled with mental health or workplace well-being, is what I do that's helped me doesn't necessarily work for everyone. I think it's about being very kind of malleable in those situations and being able to recognize, okay, this person's well-being is going to be totally different to someone who come to me yesterday with a well-being problem, and being able to kind of recognize I don't have all of the answers. And I think for me personally, if I was to ever have that conversation with my manager, I would rather than be honest and say, not necessarily that I don't have the tools, but just listen to me, rather than, okay, this is what's worked for me. This is, you should try this. It's like, that might kind of come across as not understanding my personal situation. It might come across as kind of understanding the situation in general, but not necessarily kind of adapting their management style to be personal to me, I suppose. If that makes sense. I suppose it's not about trying to be an expert. It's more about just being, like Claire said, listening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone is so different and will respond to different things. I mean, as a manager, you can, as I said at the beginning, encourage those proactive habits, so like the meditating. And I know for me, I had a really bad day a couple of weeks ago, and I just said to my team, I live a 5-minute walk from the beach. I said, I'm going to the beach and I'm going to stand in front of the sea for 10 minutes and I'm going to just calm myself down. And so it's like doing those kind of proactive things, knowing what helps you as an individual. Like that's my calm, safe space down there. So these kind of habits that you can do on a day-to-day basis, like I never meditated in my life before coming to YuLife, and now it's like, it's amazing. It's, you know, so if there are things that can support your mental health, then do it on a regular basis. Going to the gym is something a safe place. So whatever, just do whatever works for you as an individual.
I think as a manager, modelling that, I think being open yourself and saying, do you know what, I need to take a break, I'm struggling, creates that culture without you having to say, oh yeah, we have this culture. It creates it by your role modelling what it is that you want to see in your team, aren't you? And create that environment where it's okay to do those things.
Yeah.
I was just about to say exactly that as well. I think it's so powerful that yourself, Claire, was able to go, do you know what, guys, I think it's, yeah, that's such a powerful thing. And I think maybe, do you think that's maybe one thing that managers don't do enough, is being vulnerable themselves, because they don't want to show some form of weakness, or they don't want to, maybe they think they're going to spread some sort of culture throughout the rest of the office. But for me personally, I think that's a really powerful thing to do. Is the head of people at YuLife is saying, I need some time to go to the beach, reset, go to my safe space, come back, and I'll be okay. I think that's really powerful.
I think some new managers will feel uncomfortable doing that for sure, because, you know, they're just finding their feet and they haven't had these kinds of experiences before. So I'm sure managers will be feeling like that. But I think for me, one of the things about leadership and management is about being authentic. And that's, you know, the most powerful thing you can do. Don't try to be someone you're not. We all experience life. I say this all the time. Life will happen to all of us. We all go through bereavements, grief, you know, we have divorce, relationship breakdowns, whatever it is, it will happen to you at some point. I can guarantee you that it will happen at some point. So if you try and hide it, then you're not being a kind of genuine, authentic self. So yeah, as a manager, just be you. Just be you, and people around you will appreciate it for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely agree. I just wanted to touch a bit more before we go to kind of the live Q&A with a couple of questions that we've got. Just wanted to talk more about kind of modelling good examples for the team. And I think Claire from YuLife has obviously touched on, you know, being open, transparent about, you know, I'm looking after all of you guys, and your well-being is kind of my job role, I suppose, part of my job role. What else can you kind of do to model that for your team?
I think treating that as a priority, I think as a manager, treating those check-ins, treating those conversations as much a priority as doing your KPIs or your finances or whatever else it may be. That actually, it's often seen as the softer stuff, but actually, if we look after our teams and our people, then the tougher stuff is much easier and works much better. And that actually it shouldn't be that, you know, we check in or we meet up or we do our one-to-ones only if we don't have anything else pressing to do. Actually, they should be our number one priority, because then the rest of it will fall into place.
No, I think employers that do, for example, take our product and provide insurances and provide the EAP service and, you know, provide all of this wellbeing support, they're showing, hey, wellbeing is important for us. We're not just talking about it. We are actually investing in you. We are putting services, products in place to show that well-being is important. So all of that is really meaningful for people. And, you know, all of this stuff does help with employee engagement and retention and all of that good stuff as well. So why would you leave an organization that shows that they really care about you? So it's kind of good for business as well. You know, this isn't the point of the conversation, but it's good for business, you know, engagement, productivity, all of these things. So I think, yeah, just showing that you care about your people, it can have a huge impact.
I definitely think a lot of, you know, the younger members of staff within the business are definitely being more, they're recognizing this a little bit more. And that, I think I went to a summit in London, which was all about kind of employee well-being, mental health. And one of the things that I took away from that is a lot of the younger members of staff are being a lot more savvy with which businesses they pick, because of the culture that business is portraying. One of the speakers that was there was saying one of the ways to keep your best talent around is by being in touch with these sorts of things, because maybe 10, 15 years ago, it might not have been such an attractive proposition, whereas now I know that I can only really speak for myself, but yeah, that would be a very attractive proposition for me. And even money, you know, I think people are taking it more seriously than how much they're earning, because I think they're recognizing that my mental well-being, my workplace well-being is going to equate to better performance, which is going to equal more money, promotions, etc. That all comes secondary, I believe. One thing that I wanted to touch on, I suppose, with regards to the mental health, and I guess we've touched on it a little bit, is how can we not. So I know a lot of companies are talking about this once a year, you know, a World Mental Health Week, Men's Wellbeing Week, etc. There's loads of them out there. How can we create an environment where this isn't just a 1 week event, where it's not in your calendar for one day, we talk about it, we move on? How can we kind of create that year-round kind of open, transparent discussion about it, rather than just a calendar invite that's being sent to you by your leaders, I suppose?
I think it's just the consistency of lots of different channels and all the different things. So, you know, Mental Health Week is great. We're all going to kind of raise awareness more in those days and in those weeks for sure. But I think it's just doing things on a consistent, regular basis. So in my last company that I worked for, our sales team was white male 25 to 35, and I worry all the time about the suicide rates in that male population. So that was always on my mind. So even small things like we would write regular blogs and we'd talk about the statistics and say kind of what's on our mind, and people would come forward and say, can I share my story? And I'm like, yeah, let me give you a platform to share your story. And it's just keeping it on the radar all the time in a range of like different ways, and just keep talking about it. You know, a LinkedIn post, one LinkedIn post in Mental Health Week isn't going to cut it. You have to be front of mind all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good thing to do those things, as we said, for Mental Health Awareness Week or any other days. But it's then, as an organisation and as leaders and managers, what do you learn from that 1 week? What did your employees tell you during that 1 week, and what are you going to take away and embed for the other, you know, the 51 weeks of the year? That means that when we get to this week next year, you can honestly say, actually, yeah, we've got better at that. We're better at dealing with this. We're better at our staff's well-being is better as a result of the things we've learned. And how do we do that? It's not something you tick off. It's a constant ongoing action and deliberate movement, if you like, in terms of culture and culture shift.
Yeah, I think also that's a really good point. Like, we always, come January, we always set new goals, right? After these mental health awareness weeks, and, you know, when more people are talking about it, I think we could all do a little bit more potentially, where, you know, we set ourselves some goals and actually review them. I know that's another thing to add to the to-do list, I suppose. But yeah, I think that would be a really good way. And I think, you know, from my personal experience, you know, joining Roma Black, I remember the first meeting that I had with Lauren, our owner and director, was, this is the direction that I want to go in. And I've kind of never felt so backed by a manager. You know, I was so supported, and I, you know, from other roles that I've worked in, I would never have the opportunity to do this. You know, even this live event, I would never have the opportunity to jump on Solent Mind's podcast and speak to Sam, or, you know, anything like that, share posts on LinkedIn. So I think, you know, there's three things that I've certainly taken away from this. It's knowing your people, being consistent, and also understanding the culture of the company you're joining or the company that you're at. And I think, you know, I'm so grateful to be at such a good company where we can facilitate these sorts of events, live events. And I think you just need to keep being encouraged when someone does open up about their well-being at work or their mental health. I think that should be, I don't know whether it should be I don't know whether celebrated is the right word. Maybe there's a better word out there for it, but, you know, encouraged more a little bit. I don't know whether, yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe encouraged and celebrated isn't the right word, because we don't want to celebrate. Yes, well done. You've got, you know, you've got mental health issues, problems, etc. But yeah, it should be valued and encouraged. And if they want to speak about it, give them the platform to speak about it. What sort of platforms did you give to people that come forward, Claire? Was that at YuLife, or was that at a previous company?
I've honestly been talking about mental health for a very long time, and you know, I've had a few jobs in my career, and, you know, it's always the same. So We used Reward Gateway, and we used them for our intranet. So we actually set up a blog, and we said, you know, if you want to post your blog on there, we're happy to do that. I remember one guy came forward from the sales team and said his friend had actually committed suicide, and he was like, I want to be there for people. So it was just a case of sending an email to the sales guys to say, I'm here. If you need someone, I am here. I'm like, that's okay, send it out. I'm not going to stop you sending that email. So I think, just letting people have a voice. And, you know, it's not just for HR to be talking about these things, it is for everyone. So how amazing that a colleague in the business has said, hey, I'm here. People come forward and say, hey, I'd really like to be a mental health first aider. And I think the important thing with mental health is that we talk about physical health a lot, but I always say you have physical health and you have mental health. And just like your physical health, sometimes you're in like peak condition, and then Christmas happens and you put on a bit of weight and you go up and down. I may just be speaking for myself, but you know, mental health is the same. There will be peaks and troughs. I've talked about life happening to everyone. So I think recognizing that we have physical health and mental health, and both will be in better states through our life, I think that's a really powerful thing. And to think that, you know, mental health issues, you know, it's a problem. It's not, it's just that your mental health is taking a dip at that particular time. I think the more that we talk about it in that way, the better it will be.
Yeah, and I think for managers, that's a really important comparison to remember as well. If as a manager you do have a member of staff coming to you with a mental health issue, in terms of kind of keeping yourself and your responses in check, it's good to say to yourself, if they were coming to me with a broken limb or some kind of equivalent physical health issue, would I be responding like this? And if not, perhaps have a check in with yourself about why that may be.
Yeah, I think I think it's absolutely right, and I think that the points we've just covered there are absolutely ideal to kind of start to move on to the Q&A a little bit. I think we've got a comment here, which I think is from Will from Able Futures. He is live and tuned in, so thanks so much for joining us, I suppose, today. He definitely agrees with some of the comments that we've made when speaking with employers. One of the best methods their managers use is letting their teams know when themselves as managers are having a low day. I think that's so important, and that's another thing that I'm really going to take away is being, you know, although that you're in a position of a little bit more authority within the business, it's letting them still know that, you know, you are having a bad day. So yeah, thanks so much for that.
Yeah, you're a human, not a job title. Yeah.
How do we with the whole? I really like the comparison that you mentioned there, Claire, about, you know, physical health, mental health. How close do you feel like we're getting towards them being on an equal playing field? Because at the moment, you know, from my experiences, I don't know about you guys, but it's definitely not right there just yet. What else can we kind of do to kind of bring that onto a level playing field? I know we're probably not going to solve that today. I wish we could. That would be great. But yeah, how close do you think we're getting?
I think we're closer than we have been, but we're a long way. A long way. I remember having a conversation with a HR person that I worked with, and they actually said to me that, you know, she was suffering a little bit and had low mood, and she said, this happens to other people, this doesn't happen to me. And she worked in HR. So I think that's a really long way. And you know, I've already talked about kind of male suicide rates. They are not anywhere close to where they're, you know, kind of coming down. So I think we have a lot to do. But what can we do? Keep talking, keep raising awareness, make it a normal part of the conversation. Talk about well-being in your one-to-ones. Don't be afraid to come forward and say, hey, I'm struggling myself, and be that authentic leader. All of these things will help, but I do think we're a long way from where we would like to be, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially in the workplace, perhaps that's even more true, perhaps in terms of if someone is struggling with their mental health and needs some time out, we know that they're much more likely to say it's a physical health issue, even if it's actually a mental health issue, because that seems more tangible, that seems more real and more acceptable. It's more acceptable to have a migraine or a stomach bug than to have a panic attack, for example. And that's what we need to tackle and change. That actually, one is seen as unfortunate and deserving of sympathy, and the other is seen as a nuisance or something that somebody should get over themselves. Whereas we wouldn't. I worked with some young people a while ago who made a really good point around they talked about their depression and how they were feeling, and somebody was saying, "Oh, but look at all the good things in your life. Why are you depressed? You've got no reason to be depressed." And she said, "Well, when I had the flu or when I had a cold, no one says to me, 'Why have you got a cold?' You've got no reason to have a cold." And yet our mental health is treated that way. So I think it is around recognizing that one isn't more worthy than the other, and as I said earlier, perhaps as managers just checking in with ourselves. I think it can be easy. I think there's compassion fatigue is a real thing. I think actually it's important that we do check in with ourselves and each other about whether we are responding fairly and appropriately.
I think it's about as well, like, it's just the intangible of it as well. You can't unless you go down the correct steps, it's hard to actually express that. And I think one thing that happened to me when I was kind of suffering quite badly with panic attacks was that I would, and the employer was absolutely fantastic. They would, be very accommodating with everything. I was in a sales team, so it was very hard for me to have a panic attack in a morning sales meeting, but you can't choose when you're going to have these sorts of things come up. So I would just kind of leave the meeting and go and sit in a quiet room with the window open, get some fresh air. And they were very, very accommodating with that. And that was actually, they could see that, it was tangible. They could see that I was struggling, but sometimes it doesn't manifest itself in that sort of way. So it's quite hard. I think the biggest kind of discrepancy between a physical problem and a mental problem is that just how tangible it is. We do have a couple of questions, which is excellent. We've got a couple of minutes left, so let's cover off a couple of questions and then we will kind of wrap things up. So one question here is, for a care industry that is heavily focused on others already, how can they take steps to prioritise their staff's well-being? If you need me to repeat the question, I can do.
It's hard. I haven't worked in a care setting before, so I've been my career's been very focused on kind of commercial corporate, so I'm not sure. I haven't been in that care sector.
I think it is very, very difficult, and I think a lot of that comes back to what I was saying earlier about not everything that is a pressure and a stress can be addressed. Some of it comes with the job, but actually what we need to do is recognise and validate. I think not only about, okay, so we can't take away the fact that people have to work nights in a care setting, but we can think about how we can make that the best experience that it can be for people, and we can think about how we can reduce the pressures that we can reduce, and actually how we can make sure that there are outlets for people to share how they were feeling with managers and with each other. And that they don't have that sense of letting. I think one of the things in the care or support industry for like mental health that we work in, there's a real fear of taking time off or taking time out, even if it's only a short time, that you're letting the people down. People get into those industries because they do care. But actually, I think for employers, it's about giving that message that actually we care better, we deliver better quality services and support when we're well, when we look after ourselves and each other. And actually taking time to do that is not only okay, but actually it's a really important and essential part of being a good carer and being a good support worker or whatever else it may be.
I definitely think in those environments where you are solely caring for other people, the staff in hospitals, the staff in care homes, I can imagine some people get so caught up in taking the care of someone else that they sometimes forget to take care of themselves. And I think, like you mentioned, it's about having, that balance. One thing we did touch on quite briefly, I suppose, but it's work-life balance. We've got a question here about work-life balance, and obviously that can create well-being problems within the workplace. But very briefly, before we wrap up, any kind of idea on what the best way to promote work-life balance is in a more competitive environment, whether it's a sales team, whether you're, making deals, account management, etc. How do we feel we can kind of promote a work-life balance in a competitive industry or environment?
I think so at YuLife, for example, we have a remote first, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, working environment. And if I want to take 2 hours at lunch to go and walk on the beach, I will. If I want to work late, I will. So it's my choice. So I don't feel a huge amount of pressure to be chained to the desk 9 till 5. So it gives me a lot of freedom and flexibility, and that we extend that to everyone at YuLife. So I think just creating flexibility and allowing people to do what they need to do through the day is a really good thing. And I don't know, for managers, I think just not applying that pressure to people, and allowing them to set their own boundaries. So if an individual says, hey, I can't attend a meeting after 5 o'clock today, rearrange it, put it in for the following day. So I think employees need to be comfortable setting their boundaries, but managers need to kind of just take the pressure off a little bit and listen to what people are telling them.
Yeah. And again, I think that role modelling comes in really well there. I think having a manager that says, you know what, no, I am clocking off at 5 because I have got to see my kids, go for a run, whatever it may be. Actually, I think that sets a really good tone and sets a really good precedent and the staff culture will follow.
Especially thinking those competitive environments as well, giving a little bit more flexibility. You actually get more out of the individual because there's that trust being built, there's that understanding being built, and also you create that environment where you almost want to do more for your manager because they've gone that extra mile for you to be flexible. I know this isn't a tit for tat kind of thing, but especially in my environment, being in sales, coming from a sales environment, if I was ever given that more leniency, that bit more flexibility, I'd come back and I'd feel more alive, more able to give my absolute all. Any final words on that subject, or are we all good with that? All good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, we have ran over slightly, but I appreciate you sticking around. What a great chat. I really appreciate both of your time today. Anyone that has watched today, please go and check out Solent Mind and YuLife. And once again, I really appreciate your time, Claire and Claire. Next time we'll try and get a third Claire on as well to make it even more difficult. Once again, thanks so much to everyone that's tuned in. We will be doing more of these in the new year. And please go and check out Claire Grant, Claire Cathcart, Solent Mind and YuLife. Thanks so much, ladies, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.